Marty Stuart never planned to become a living archive of country music. But somewhere between his first guitar chord and his 40th year on stage, that's exactly what happened. By the time most kids his age were learning to drive, he'd already spent years on the road with one of bluegrass music's founding fathers, absorbing lessons that no classroom could have taught him. And decades later, when the person he loved most received news that would have collapsed a lesser man, all of that road-hardened strength finally found its true purpose, not in front of an audience, but in the quiet rooms where real life happens. This is a story about two people who found each other late enough in life to understand exactly what they had, and who held on to it when everything around them started to shake. Marty Stuart arrived in the world on September 30th, 1958, in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Born into a household where gospel music came through the walls and rhythm and blues drifted in off the radio. Those early sounds didn't just pass through him, they took root. By 12 years old, his guitar playing had developed far past what his age should have allowed, and he joined his first band while most of his classmates were still working out their school schedules. At 14, that skill brought him to the attention of Lester Flatt, the bluegrass legend who caught a glimpse of Marty performing and immediately extended an invitation to join his touring band. Flatt didn't hand out those invitations to just anyone, and Marty understood the weight of the offer. He accepted, walked away from an ordinary adolescence without looking back, and stepped into one of the most demanding apprenticeships that American roots music had ever produced. Life on the road with Flatt meant learning country music's culture from the inside out. Not just the notes and chords, but the history, the discipline, and the unspoken code of conduct that keeps a genre honest. The touring life taught him things about stamina and craft that would serve him for the next 5 decades. When Lester Flatt died in 1979, Marty was 20 years old and suddenly without a mentor, standing at the edge of a career with no map and no instructions. What followed was a period of pulling together every musical thread he'd absorbed: traditional country, rockabilly, honky-tonk, and the gospel roots that had been there since childhood, and weaving them into something that was unmistakably his own. The early 1980s brought his first real solo momentum, built show by show and song by song. And by 1990, the album Hillbilly Rock arrived and reframed everything. The title track crossed over into mainstream success. His stage presence was impossible to miss, and the deep knowledge of country music history he'd been accumulating since childhood gave him a credibility that pure chart performance never could have manufactured on its own. He collected country music memorabilia with the intensity of someone who understood he was holding pieces of something that could disappear if nobody paid attention, and audiences felt that reverence in the way he carried himself on stage. Nashville took notice, the music industry responded, and Marty Stuart earned his place not just as a performer, but as a keeper of the tradition. None of it, though, prepared him for what meeting Connie Smith would do to him. Connie Smith, born Constance June Metter, had built one of country music's most respected voices long before Marty ever crossed her path. Since the 1960s, her vocals had carried an emotional depth that separated her from everyone else on the bill, and her hits had connected with listeners who felt she was singing directly to something they'd never been able to put into words. When Marty encountered her at a country music seminar in the early 1990s, he was already an admirer of her work from a distance. What he wasn't prepared for was the effect of actually being in the room with her. He described it later as being struck immediately by her warmth, by an authenticity that she carried off stage just as naturally as she carried it on. Their first meeting was brief, but it left something behind. They stayed in contact, their paths crossing at shows and industry events across the calendar, and the professional respect they held for each other gradually became something more personal. Marty, whose energy ran loud and outward, found in Connie a grounded and soulful counterweight that didn't dim him, but made him steadier. She found in him a genuine enthusiasm for the music's roots that matched her own in ways she hadn't expected from someone a generation younger. The friendship deepened, the feeling sharpened, and Marty responded the way any honest singer-songwriter would. He wrote about what he was feeling. The song Tempted became a hit, and the emotions behind it weren't performed. In 1997, they married, surrounded by close friends and family, and the ceremony felt less like a formal event and more like a confirmation of something that had been unavoidable since that first meeting. Marriage between two musicians who carry their own artistic identities and separate creative histories is never without friction, and Marty and Connie didn't pretend their situation was an exception. The concert tour schedule alone presented a sustained test. Months on the road, the slow erosion of private life, the particular kind of exhaustion that accumulates when performing night after night isn't a choice, but a professional obligation. They traveled together when the calendar allowed, and that helped. But the music industry doesn't restructure itself around personal arrangements. Critics watch their relationship with the quiet skepticism that show business tends to generate, expecting the cracks to appear sooner or later. The cracks never came. What appeared instead was that each of them had become the other's most reliable creative resource. Marty's songwriting took on a new emotional register after their marriage, and Connie found herself approaching her catalog, old and new alike, with a freedom she credited directly to his consistent support. Every performance they shared on stage became something audiences described not as a concert, but as a story unfolding in real time. Two people performing their actual lives in front of a crowd that could feel the difference between a show and the truth. And then the story turned somewhere nobody wanted it to go. When Connie's diagnosis arrived, it landed on both of them before either had time to prepare. Her health was at risk, the road ahead carried real uncertainty, and the life they'd built together had to reorganize itself around something neither of them had chosen. Connie faced the fear that comes with that kind of news, the abrupt fragility after years of living with energy and purpose, the sudden awareness that the body operates on its own timeline regardless of anyone's plans. Marty didn't wait to be asked where he stood. He told her they would face it together, and then he made sure that wasn't just a line he'd delivered in a difficult moment and walked away from. He pulled back the touring schedule that had defined his professional life for decades, choosing fewer performances and fewer appearances across the board. He drove Connie to appointments, sat through consultations with her, researched treatment options, rearranged their home to make her daily routines less difficult, and absorbed household responsibilities that had always been shared between them. The role asked nothing of his musical ability and everything of his character, and he stepped into it without hesitation or complaint. In the quiet spaces between medical appointments, he made sure she felt loved, made sure she felt seen, and made sure she always had something solid to lean against when the day turned hard. He held her hand through the worst moments and stayed present for all the ones in between, which turned out to be where most of the work actually lived. The country music community, once Connie's situation became public knowledge, gathered around them the way communities built on shared music and shared history tend to do when one of their own is hurting. Artists who had performed alongside both of them spoke publicly about their admiration and extended their support without needing to be asked. Fans who had grown up with Connie's voice as a companion through their own hard years organized virtual prayer circles and benefit concerts and pooled resources in any way they could find. Thousands of cards and letters arrived at their home, carrying messages from people who had never met either of them, but felt connected to them through the music. The Grand Ole Opry community, a world Connie had been part of since the early years of her career, responded with the full weight of its long institutional memory and its loyalty to the people who had helped build it. Online communities formed specifically around her story, people gathering to share what her singing had meant to them through grief, through illness, through the ordinary difficult days that don't earn headlines but still cost something to get through. Marty personally acknowledged as much of that outpouring as he could manage, responding in interviews and on social media with an openness that matched the honesty of everything else he had done since the diagnosis arrived. Their days now carry both difficulty and something harder to name. A quality that settles into lives when people have been forced to reckon with what actually matters and found that the list is shorter than they thought. Marty still plays music, the way someone who learned the guitar at 12 will always play music, regardless of what else life delivers. And their home holds that history in its walls. Guitars lean against things, handwritten lyrics sit on desks, and the melodies that built their careers still move through the rooms the way old habits do. But the stage sees less of him than it once did, and that shift happened without visible regret. Connie moves through each day with a gratitude that people close to her say was always part of who she is, only deepened now by everything she and Marty have come through together. They walk through the garden, sit on the porch in the early hours, put on recordings of songs that meant something to each of them long before they ever met, and find in those accumulated small moments the kind of weight that a sold-out concert used to take all night to produce. Their bond, built first on a mutual love of American country music traditions and the history of the genre that shaped them both, has grown into something that doesn't need a performance space to express itself. Friends, family, and fans check in consistently, and that steady presence of people who genuinely care gives both of them something dependable to return to on the days that test them most. The uncertainty hasn't resolved into clean answers because that's not how health struggles of this kind work, and they both understand that clearly. But Marty and Connie have learned to stand in the unresolved present without letting the unknown future strip the day of its value. They built their life together on the belief that music carries people through things that nothing else can quite reach. What they're living now is the most personal version of that belief either of them has ever had to hold on to. Not performed for an audience, not yet translated into a finished lyric, but real in every way that the word means anything at all. Marty Stuart spent decades learning from the best people in the business that the songs people carry with them for the rest of their lives are the ones that told the truth about something. What he and Connie are living right now is its own kind of song. Unfinished, honest, and worth every note.